first panel dedicated to privacy and data protection issues related to the use of multimodal biometrics on the move at border crossing. Well, I am happy and quite honored to be part of this panel which deal with this issue, and will gather persons with very complementary profiles to tackle this issue. So this panel is linked to the Protect project, an EU subsidized project, which is aimed at analyzing the conditions to develop, in view of border control, an enhanced person identification system, which will be based on contactless biometrics, taking into account person identification on the move. And as I've just told, the persons here around the table present very complementary profiles. We have two researchers in this field of data protection, and we have a person representing business in innovation, a person from the field the police control and the border control, and then a person representing the EDPS. I will come back to each one, but at first I will give the floor to Diana Dimitrova, who is researcher as FITS Karlsruhe, which is part of the Leibniz Institute for Informations Infrastructure, and she specialized in data protection topics in the area of freedom, security, and justice. So a really good opportunity to come here, and with her special topic of interest, which is border control and migration. So Diana, I will give you the floor.
Thank you for the introduction and for the welcoming words. In my introduction, I will first accentuate how important this topic nowadays is, because first of all, the migration topic has never been off the agenda in the past years. On the other hand, we have the GDPR, and we have so many new proposals on EU level concerning large-scale databases that concern millions of people, and we recently also had the proposal for interoperability of these systems. Now, the topic which we are going to discuss today raises so many data protection issues, also practical issues and technological issues, but I will let our panelists discuss them, the problems they raise and the possible solutions. What I will do in my small introduction is give you a very brief overview of the existing background databases or large-scale information systems on EU level, just to warm up the discussion and make sure you're all on the same page with us. So one of the existing databases is the second generation Schengen Information System, which we shortly call SIS. And it contains numerous alerts. One category of alerts concerns return decisions against third country nationals who are not allowed then, if they have an entry ban, to enter the Schengen area. And then we have another category of alerts concerning law enforcement cooperation. And we have alerts such as alerts on missing people, suspects, victims of crime, and so on and so forth, as well as information about stolen objects such as identity documents, banknotes, and vehicles. The biometric data that are stored on these databases are currently facial images and fingerprints, but the SIS is being currently revised, and there are proposals to include also DNA and palm prints in it. Another information system is the visa information system, which contains data on third country nationals who apply for a short stay visa to enter the Schengen area, and which contains data, alphanumeric data or biographical data, such as a name, passport number, nationality, and so on and so forth, as well as also fingerprints and facial images. And Eurodac is a third existing database containing currently only the fingerprints of asylum seekers. In order, the purpose of this database is to make sure that an asylum seeker didn't apply for asylum already in another member state, and if this is the case, that they should be returned to that member state to apply for asylum. And next to the fingerprints that are stored, there is a plan to expand the Eurodac to include also alphanumeric data or biographical data, and also to lower the age of the people who should be fingerprinted, so from 14 to 6 years of age. Now, these are already existing databases, but we have 3 more in the pipeline. And one of them is the entry-exit system, which just got its legal basis, and it's starting to be built. And it will apply to all those third country nationals who enter the European Union or Schengen area for a short visit, and to ensure that the main purpose being to ensure that they did not overstay their allowed stay of 90 days. And these people will have to also provide fingerprints and facial images next to the alphanumeric data, and it will apply to all third country nationals on a short stay visit, no matter whether they need to have a visa or not. Then there is the proposal on the European criminal records for third country nationals, so that there is a common database for all third country nationals who are convicted in a member state. And it will contain also fingerprints and facial images, and it's more a tool for judicial cooperation. And last but not least, there is the proposal called EDPS, which would seek to collect only biographical data without biometric data for all those third country nationals who don't need a visa to enter the Schengen area. Since it does not contain biometrics, it might not be the topic of discussion, but however, it's part of the interoperability concept, so it's worth mentioning. Now, I just gave you the brief background, and I will let our distinguished panelists discuss the different topics that biometrics at borders raise. And I think we will first start with Franck Dumortier.
Yeah. So, Franck, he's a senior researcher at CREETS, which is at a research center at the University of Namur in the Freedom in the Information Society unit. And his research is focused on the legal aspects of surveillance technology, especially linked to data protection law and to public security interests and fight against cybercrime and against terrorism. And he's also lecturer in cybersecurity. In a common master in the French-speaking part of Belgium. So, Franck, I think you are a very good place to take the floor now.
So, thank you very much. In the Protect project, I'm the legal guy. In fact, that's my position, and I will speak about the legal constraints that are raised in the Protect project. So, first and foremost, I would like to recall something it's really important. The Earth is a globe. That's reality. So, free movement is the natural thing. The natural thing is people can move freely. Borders is a human construction. It's mainly a legal construction. It's a legal construction that goes against a fundamental right that is free movement, but also against a fundamental right that is privacy. So it's an interference with the right to privacy and with Article 8 of the Human Rights Convention. It must be legal and proportionate for the aim that is pursued. So, given that context, what is the concept of the Protect project? It's to develop a multimodal biometric solution for identity confirmation on the move of travelers with the aim to enhance border security as well as facilitate cross-border movement. The first question here is, what is meant by facilitating? We'll see that the purpose is not always clear, because you can facilitate lots of things when you want to facilitate cross-border movement. But I'll come back to the purpose. The purpose is important in the field of data protection because you have to apply the purpose limitation principle. But I'll come back to that. The system should therefore process various emerging biometric modalities that we would fuse, and Franck will talk about it later, such as 2D face, 3D face, iris, periocular, and finger veins, voice, and anthropometrics. I won't go into details about those modalities, and Franck will speak about those later. So the question we have first is how to combine these new modalities with the statement of the European Council of Thessaloniki in 2003 that said, a coherent approach is needed in the European Union on biometric identifiers or biometric data for documents for third country nationals, European citizens, passports and information systems. And indeed, when you look at this, you see, and that's what Diana said, when you look at passports and documents, well, in EU passports, in resident permits, you get fingerprints and facial image. In the visa, you don't have biometrics, but the people that hold a visa, well, they're checked against the VIS, and the VIS contains as well fingerprints and facial image. The SIS2 also contains fingerprints and facial image, and the EES, as said, also will contain fingerprints and facial image for visa holders, for visa exempted, for visa acceptance. Sorry, for visa holders, they will be checked against the VIS. Sorry. So, in all those databases that are being checked, two biometrics features are used: fingerprints and facial image. So, how could we implement new biometric modalities taking into account that fact? That is the question. If you look at Article 4.14 of the GDPR, you have the definition of biometric data. It's personal data resulting from specific technical processing relating to the physical, physiological, or behavioral characteristics of a natural person to allow the unique identification. But the Working Party 29 nuanced it a bit by saying that even if the patterns that are used in practice measure only a certain degree of probability, it's also considered as biometric. So biometric data in the sense of the GDPR are considered as sensitive data, the raw data, but also the template, meaning the numerical translation of the raw features. What ends if biometric data is sensitive data? The principle is that normally the principle is that biometric data for the purpose of uniquely identifying a natural person should be prohibited. But there are exceptions, and the two main ones in our topic are the ones that are listed here. You need consent, or you need a basis in union or member state law, which must be proportionate to the aim pursued according to, again, Article 8 of the Human Convention on Human Rights, European Convention on Human Rights. So, which basis can we use to add new modalities? That is the question. The legal basis for the basis of lawfulness for the databases which Diana spoke about, which are currently in place, is, of course, a law, European law, for VIS, SIS, and EES, which are in the scope of the project, but which is a basis of lawfulness for new modalities, contactless modalities that we are developing in the project. Could we use consent? Well, when you look at consent, consent means any freely given, specific, informed, and an ambiguous indication by a statement or by clear affirmative action. GDPR says also that a data subject, if you use that basis, he has a right to withdraw his consent at any time. Additionally, for biometric data, consent must be explicit. When you look further to consent, Article 29 Working Party issued an opinion about consent in the biometric field, and they said renewability and revocability is really essential. So biometric systems should be designed in a way that allows to revoke the identity link, either in order to renew it or to permanently delete it when the consent is revoked, to be sure that the biometric feature would not be used against the consent of someone that revoked his consent, withdrew his consent. A third thing that is important is that is free choice of data subjects for border control convenience possible? Well, look at recital 43 of the GDPR. It says that consent should not provide a valid legal ground for the processing of personal data in a specific case where there is a clear imbalance between the data subject and the controller, in particular where the controller is a public authority. Of course, border control authorities are public authorities, so there is a clear imbalance for consent. So consent could not be considered as freely given in the public context. However, consent is still possible for commercial purposes if the controller is not a public authority, let's say. For example, in a 2005 deliberation, the CNIL, which is a French DPA, authorized the use of fingerprints for fidelity chip cards of travelers at the airport of Nice for enhancing services such as parking zones, other services, etc. And the CNIL said to use it for commercial purposes, you need a voluntary use, so real consent, freely given, and so on, and the storage must be not centralized. Those were the criteria, but only for commercial. So consent cannot be used in the public context. That's not the best basis. Another basis that can be used is union and or member state law. If you look at this, there is a new regulation, 2017-2225, 25, yeah, of 30 November 2017 that amends the Schengen Border Code. Article 8D allows member states to establish voluntary, based on consent of the travelers, national facilitation programs. But therefore, they need a law. Member states need to take a law. The purpose of it is to allow pre-vetted and pre-cleared third country nationals to waive them from the requirement to be subject first to an interview on their means of subsistence, to be sure they have enough money to enter into the Schengen area. They don't need to be asked again about the purpose of travel and their point of departure and destination. So the purpose of the NFPs, the National Facilitation Program, if a law is taken by a member state, is to facilitate only those three things, not to speed up the process at border control. That is the purpose of what is now written in the amendment of the Schengen Border Code. So, can we use it to protect, to add additional biometrics on the move? Well, first, we need a law. Consent, is consent voluntary or not? We can discuss it, but it's not maybe the moment to discuss about this. But what is important is that this legal basis in the amendment of the Schengen Border Code works only for third country nationals. You cannot use it for EU, EEA, or Switzerland travelers. With legal basis to enhance then the travel experience for those travelers? We have none for the moment, really. Secondly, as I said, the purpose of that amendment is to facilitate only the requirements of means of subsistence, purpose of travel, and point of departure and destination. It's not to speed up border control databases checks. For border databases checks, you still need traditional biometrics, which are the coherent ones, fingerprints, and facial image. You still have to check the VIS, the SIS, and the EES with those ones. Can I go to the next one? Yeah. So, of course, those laws need to be proportionate. You know all the principles of the GDPR. I won't come back to that. And I will simply apply and say, if a law is taken by the member state, which principle should be applied to the biometrics in that law that would use additional biometrics to facilitate the three things that I mentioned. First, proportionality. There must be a strict assessment of the necessity and proportionality. If the benefit is relatively minor, such an increase in convenience or a slight cost saving, then the loss of privacy is not appropriate. That's what the Article 29 Working Party says. Also, proportionality, according to the Article 29 Working Party, it is preferred to avoid centralized storage, of course, because if there is a leak of biometric data, there's a problem. So it's advisable that biometric systems are based on the reading of biometric data stored on media that are held exclusively by the relevant data subjects. For example, in our case, in a chip card or in a smartphone, but Franck will talk about that. Data minimization is also an issue. Biometric data should be stored as biometric templates, not raw data. Template should be extracted in a way that it is specific to that biometric system and not used by other controllers of similar systems. The goal of that opinion of the Article 29 Working Party is to avoid illegitimate interoperability. And I think that the EDPS will talk about that issue. Also, Article 29 Working Party says the definition of the size, the quantity of information of the template is a crucial issue. Don't make templates that are too big. the size of the template should be wide enough to manage security, but also the size of the template should not be too large so as to avoid the risks of biometric data reconstruction. The generation of the template should be a one-way process so that it's not possible to regenerate the raw data from the template. All these issues should be mentioned in the national facilitation programs if they use additional biometrics. And then, of course, accuracy. The manufacturer has to implement system aiming to determine if the biometric data is both genuine and still connected to a natural person, of course. And finally, storage limitation. The manufacturer must implement appropriate automated data erasure mechanisms to ensure the timely deletion of personal data that become unnecessary. It's again the application of a general principle to biometrics. And finally, of course, security. Security, well, mechanisms should be based on cryptography. Cryptography is, of course, essential in that domain, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franck. And now I will give the floor to another Franck Schmalz, who is director in innovations and business development at VERIDOS. And VERIDOS is a joint venture of the two largest German providers for high security technologies. And so it's a company creating secure and pioneering identification and identity solutions. So Franck, I think you could tell us about, so what would be the solution for this person identification on the move?
Thank you very much. Yeah. So maybe, So maybe first, thank you. Maybe we can first look a little bit at the background, what we think that has been issued, also the call by the European Union to make this research project. So there's the fact that IATA made some statistics on the progress of air traffic and travelers, basically, and what they say is basically in the next 20 years, we will have a doubling of air traffic travelers. And we have, of course, the issue how to handle these travelers at the borders. Yeah? As if we assume that we will still have borders, what we have to do currently now, I think, we will have to cope with them somehow. So there are two possibilities, basically. We can install more e-gates, we can install more stuff. But this basically means that we will need more space at the airports. And space is very limited at the airports. And we can see that if we have a perspective of 20 years, we will not be able to increase the space for doing so at the airport. So we have a problem there. So the second thing we can do is basically speed up the process. We can try to speed up the process at the border. However, if we want to speed up the process, we need to have new approaches beyond the e-gates. We can also calculate today that even with the speed that e-gates are currently producing for checking travelers, it will be not enough to cope with this amount of people. So this is the call. BES6, secure societies, and I extracted basically 3 main points. So it was a long call basically, but I extracted 3 main points that we identified in this call. One was we should explore new biometric modalities at borders. We should try to produce a fluent, non-intrusive control process for the travelers. And we should embrace the related ethical, societal, and data protection aspects. This is the consortium that we have. So that's University of Reading, who is consortial leader. We have Namur, University of Salzburg, Eurocom, and we have end users. For example, the Polish Border Guard is participating in the Home Office. And we as VERIDOS, we are basically building a demonstrator then that should show how this could work out. Most of these companies, most of these participants are universities that are doing research basically in these modalities. So if you're looking at the biometric modalities, these are the ones that will be researched by our university partners. And maybe the first question would also be, why do we are looking at all at additional biometric modalities? So if we are looking at what Franck just explained about data protection and biometrics, he talked about templates and template protection. One issue with template protection that we have is template protection is reducing accuracy. So on the one hand, basically the law says we have to keep track of accuracy, and we should use template protection, but these mechanisms affecting accuracy basically. And we should also take care of anti-spoofing, and a way to do that would be to combine several biometric features to have a better accuracy, even though if we have template protection, and also to have better anti-spoofing capabilities. So this would be the advantage to use multiple biometrics in that area. We are looking at two scenarios. One is the ARC border, and the other one is the land border. I will here only concentrate on the sea border, ARC border, where basically we have individual travelers walking over the border. And this is an e-gate. This is the current technical system that is used for automated border control. And if you're looking at speeds here, we can see that reading out the document takes about 5 to 6 seconds. And the next part that is taking a lot of time is the gate mechanics. That's about 10 seconds. And the processing time is, if everything goes well, 15 to 18 seconds around for e-gates. So if you're asking the questions, how can we gain speed? That's where we are coming from. Of course, we are looking at here and here what we can do. If you're looking at the reading of the document, we have a lot of issues there that people have to put the document on a reader. It takes 5 to 6 seconds ideally to read out the document, but if they're doing mistakes, and this is happening often because it's not easy to handle, then it's taking even longer. So this is an interesting point in that area, and the gate mechanics, of course, too. So first, if we are talking about additional biometrics, we have to enroll them somehow. So we have to take these biometrics from the travelers. If we are thinking about a facilitation program, we would have to have a kiosk where these biometrics are taking. And then the question is basically where to put them. We cannot put them on the passport because the passport is specified. It's closed up system basically. You cannot add something. You could do it in the database, but we don't want to do that because this is also something that is, from the legal point of view, not desired, and also from what we have seen so far from European Parliament decisions. So we need another data carrier, and a nice data carrier would be, of course, a smartphone, because we have it all with us all the time. And also, there are data transmission methods with smartphones that are very easy to handle, and we would get away from the handling problems we have currently with the passport. So, and this is how then such a verification process could look like. So basically, a traveler is approaching the border with his smartphone, and then he is walking just to a corridor where on the move the biometrics are verified. Before that, the data is transferred to the system from the smartphone. So the user basically presses a button, the data is transferred to the system, then the verification takes place, and then afterwards the data can be erased from the system again. So basically, this is a very similar process that we have currently with the e-gates. With the e-gates, you're putting your passport on the reader, the data is read out, the biometrics, the verification takes place, and if you pass through the gate, then the data is erased from the system that has been just transferred from your passport. So one issue, of course, is if we are dealing with smartphones, smartphones are not very secure devices. There are some measures from manufacturers to increase security, but it is very individual to each model. So what we're thinking about is basically putting the data not in plain on the smartphone, but it encrypted, and the encryption keys will be in the background system and will be accessed in the moment when the verification takes place. So the encrypted data is basically transferred to the system, it's decrypted, it's used, and then it's thrown away again, like I described before that. So that be our approach to this problem. And yeah, thank you very much so far from my side.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. And now, as I told you that this panel has a very broad and complementary profiles, so I'll give the floor to Mikko, Simola, and after the researchers and the lawyers and the business. And now, Mikko, you will represent the field of border security, you know. You are, today you are Justice and Home Affairs Counselor for Schengen Borders and Visa at the permanent representation of Finland to the EU, but you have been previously working as a border security expert responsible for EU coordination and Schengen matters as regards the management of the external borders of the Border Department of the Finnish Ministry of Interior. You have experience in the field of border security you have had this experience for almost 20 years with practical border control experience from operational district of the Finnish border guard. And you have served for 4 years as expert in Frontex headquarters. So I think you are the perfect person to take the floor now. I give it to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon also from my side. I will focus on my intervention on the aspect how to facilitate security and fluency of cross-border traffic when further developing the use of biometrics, mentioning a bit on the operational environment from the EU external borders point of view, and then a bit, let's say, practical aspects, which from my point of view are important to be taken into account when further developing the use of biometrics in the future. Well, currently the scale of assessed or estimated border crossings via the border crossing points at the external borders of the EU is annually approximately a bit more than 700 million, and based off some studies, it has been estimated that in 5 years it will be something like 880 million. Vast majority will definitely travel via airports, but well, we have heard already today that it's important that we are not forgetting the almost 300 million other passengers that travel to EU via land borders, which is certainly an important aspect from the Finnish point of view, and then via the sea borders as well. During the last years in the migration crisis, sometimes when you are following the public debate, from my point of view, the focus is well, for obvious reasons perhaps, on the border surveillance which is happening between the border crossing points. Not so much on the border crossing points activities, which is important, certainly taking into account the fact that the main bulk of the border crossings will luckily take place in the future via the border crossing points as well. So, for example, thinking about the main migration crisis here from the EU perspective, 2015, the detections of illegal border crossings between the border crossing points was something like 1.8 million if we calculate the traveling through of the Western Balkans as well, and still it's quite a small figure comparing to the 800 million via the border crossing points. So certainly important topic. Still looking at the environment at the external borders, it's important to remember also in the development projects that changes are quite rapid, and it's difficult to predict different factors from political or economical instability to climate change or something like that. But certainly main challenges for the border management are related to the secure and fluent control of the continuously growing passenger flows. And well, this is an important point, this so-called double aim of border checks, not only focusing on the security, but remembering the fluency as well, because actually from my point of view the fluency contributes definitely to the security from the border guard perspective. A few words on integrated border management concept. Nowadays use of state-of-the-art technology is one of the 11 strategic elements of this IBM, Integrated Border Management concept, which was first time defined on regulation level in 2016 when the regulation on the European Border and Coast Guard entered into force. And this is one new element because, well, as we have heard from the previous speakers, technical development enables many things in the future, and it's important that the border management is supported by advanced mobile and interoperable European technical systems. Because what Border Guard needs is as end users, is that they have fast and seamless access to information they need, and they have access based on the law in order to perform their tasks, taking into account the fluency aspect as well. So therefore these large-scale IT systems we heard from the first intervention as well need to be continuously aligned with the strategic objectives, and availability and quality of the information are two important points, and data accuracy, practical measures for ensuring that, I would say this is also one thing which need to be focused. Then I would like to mention one challenge or problem: multiple identities. Use of biometrics is necessary for combating that problem. We heard already today that the entry-exit system, which hopefully will be in place in 2020 for third country nationals, that is important for enhancing the efficiency of border checks. So the implementation phase, which is currently ongoing, is an important thing. So facial image and fingerprints will be in crucial role for identifying third country nationals in a reliable way. And sometimes I think that the second part of this double aim of border checks, the fluency, is forgotten in the debate and discussions also when the EU regulations are being negotiated, because I would say that it's also a benefit for bona fide business travelers that they are identified properly and conveniently in a short period of time, and they should not be mixed or confused with mala fide, so-called mala fide travelers having, for example, the same name and alphanumerical data. And one could even say that the fluency of cross-border traffic is a fundamental right of a person via right to freedom of movement. So one reason of the problem related to incomplete information and difficulties to detect multiple identities and combat identity fraud as well is that the identity data, including biometrics, is nowadays stored in a separate information systems which are quite fragmented from the end user's point of view, which means that then it's quite difficult to detect multiple identities and to combat identity fraud. It's nowadays possible that people are recorded under different identities in different systems without being detected. So hopefully this problem will be mainly solved and tackled via the latest Commission's proposal we already heard today, the interoperability package for the EU-level information systems. I would say, let's say, representing a bit from the practitioner's point of view in this panel, that kind of component which would show the links between multiple identities corresponding to the same biometric identifiers, and by showing these links to the authorities which have access to the data and which are involved in the border management, could provide a powerful tool for detecting and combating identity fraud and improving internal security. And this so-called shared biometric matching service would enable searches across different information systems holding biometric data. And I would say again that it's beneficial from the traveler's point of view and also from the law enforcement border guard's point of view. A bit more on the current challenges at the external borders. I could mention that the performance and capacity of different member states' authorities is important to be taken into account, because when there are many players, the rules and harmonization is not so simple. We have new tools also for that. For example, the so-called border control related vulnerability assessment, which has basis in the Border and Coast Guard regulation, was performed last year as first time, and in the first vulnerability assessment on EU level, the vulnerabilities in border checks represented the largest share of all vulnerabilities in the whole EU. One example was that despite of the Schengen Acquis, the Schengen Borders Code we heard also today, is that still systematic checks of third country nationals against SIS or VIS information system and other databases is currently still not guaranteed in all member states. And now even a bit more on some practical aspects and impacts to the border checks. When we have started, now I'm saying from the Finnish point of view, the planning for the implementation of entry-exit system, the more we have done that, the more we have realized that it really needs careful planning, because, for example, different conditions and means of transportation needs to be taken into account and connected to the technical solutions. For example, checking the biometrics in a moving train, again, ensuring fluency at the same time, or then outside on a car lane where the passengers are in the car in a temperature minus 35 degrees. It creates certain challenges for ensuring the smooth and convenient way of handling the border checks, covering biometrical verification as well. I think it has been quite clearly said today already that taking into account the current systems and the new regulations which are in force or about to be in force, in a short term, there is certainly a need from the practitioner's point of view to develop technologies which would support the use of facial image and fingerprints. And looking a bit more to the future, certainly that kind of research activity is important, like this project, because that way we can create important bases for changing and widening the use of biometrics in a proper manner when the functioning of the current legal basis under development at the moment is being assessed after few years from now. Connected to that, solutions like we heard, biometric pathways, which would enable, for example, using face recognition or other biometrics on move, connecting and identifying passengers at the airports, would certainly benefit travelers and border guards if the verification could be done before the passengers from the big aircrafts arrive to the border control booths. At the end, I would like to mention, let's say, my 4 points for further developing the biometric solutions. First, I would say that it's important to set and develop time limits for biometric data to be checked and transmitted. Of course, we heard also already on the templates, which is an important factor on that, because otherwise we will create huge delays in performing border checks at the border crossing points. Secondly, the quality of biometrical data is important. One challenge on that is that there can be difficulties in enrolling biometrics with a proper quality, especially in challenging field conditions outside or in a moving carriers. and admission of lower quality of biometrics can then reduce the application performance, which causes delays and challenges to the law enforcement as well. Thirdly, the so-called query capacity of different IT systems we are using now needs to be updated to cope with the increased number of the passengers and even more complex queries containing biometrical information or the templates related to the biometrics. And fourth point would be the most important and perhaps the most practical one. The practical aspects and common sense needs to be remembered. So-called facilitation programs were already mentioned, and this is one of the favorite points, because when further developing the use of biometrics at the border crossing points, from the practitioner's point of view, in addition to the operational environment and conditions of the border crossing at the border crossing points, the bona fide travelers like businessmen need to be taken into account and treated in a wise manner. For example, biometrics of so-called pre-vetted, trusted travelers benefiting from these facilitation programs, registered travelers programs, those persons' biometrics should not always be verified electronically. This is one important aspect we managed to put into the new EES, entry-exit system regulation as well, because in that way we can give border guard practitioners more time to focus on using their skills for detecting those passengers which should be detected. With these words, I would like to end my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikko, and for this practitioner's point of view, very precious here around this table and in this panel. And so now I will finish by giving the floor to Lara Smit. Lara, you represent the European Data Protection Supervisor, the EDPS, and you are a legal officer in the Policy and Consultation Unit of the EDPS, and your main focus is on large-scale IT systems for border control, migration, and police cooperation. So I think you are the right person to tell us what is the point of view of the EDPS on this very important subject of today.
Thank you, Cecile, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. I understand that my role in these discussions is to bring this discussion on privacy and data protection issues related to the use of contactless biometric technologies at border crossing point. It's a very long title in a larger context, because as Diana mentioned already, migration, border control, and these large-scale IT systems haven't been off the EU agenda for many years. Actually, a lot has been going on and in this area at EU level, and a lot is still going on. So I would like to discuss a bit more about the Small Borders package and the recent, I will touch upon as well the recent legislative proposals that were tabled by the Commission back, in last December on interoperability of large-scale IT systems. So starting with the Smart Borders package, we've heard, I think most of the panelists already mentioned the entry-exit system, but I will say a few more words about this. So the package was made of two regulations that were proposed by the Commission back in 2016. One establishing this new EU large-scale IT system that is the entry-exit system, and the other integrating the technical change that are needed to use the entry-exit system in the Schengen's borders code. This entry-exit system will record all entries and exits of third country nationals, so non-EU citizens in the Schengen area, but also all refusals of entry. By doing so, the idea is to replace the current system of stamping all passports of third country nationals, and to record these entries and exits electronically in a large-scale databases. So this idea of creating the entry-exit system is not new. It dates back to 2008, I think, the first time it appeared in Commission communication. And so after almost 10 years now, it became law. The regulations were published in the official journal in December and entered into force in December. So the reason why it took also a very long time is because it was those were the second proposals. A first smart border package was tabled back in 2013. But it got stopped at the time in the notably by the European Parliament due to data protection concerns, because the entry exits in order to function will have to store very important amounts of personal data, alphanumeric data, but also biometric data. It will rely on two biometric features: the facial image, and fingerprints. So the first proposal required the storage of 10 fingerprints and the facial image of all third country nationals for at least 5 years. For 181 days. So that was in the first proposal. Now the second proposal after the second proposal reduced this to the collection of 4 fingerprints and the facial image to be stored for an increased period compared to the first proposal of 5 years. The EDPS has been involved in this discussion, in these debates and this discussion from the very first start. We've issued opinions on both the first and the second smart borders package. Since the entry-exit will imply the collection, significant collection, storage and use of personal data of third country nationals. So the legislator had, among others, consideration to consider the fundamental rights to privacy and data protection that are protected under the EU Charter in Articles 7 and 8. The data processing envisaged with the building up of this new large-scale IT system to be compatible with the Charter had to comply with all the conditions of Article 52.1 of the Charter, including the requirements of necessity and proportionality. The EDPS considered from the start that the processing of personal data implied by the entry-exit system were significant and intrusive, especially if we take into account the number of persons that would be affected by the system, the type of information, alphanumeric data and biometric data that would be processed through the system, but also the different purposes of the system, because aside from the migration, the border management and the facilitation purposes, there is also a law enforcement access that's provided that was in the proposal and now in the regulation. Under certain conditions, national competent authorities could have access to the entry-exit systems data and also Europol. So in the second entry-exit proposal, the EDPS welcomed the fact that the data set and the number of biometric data that third country nationals were to provide had been reduced. We also raised our concerns regarding several aspects of the text, such as the longer data retention periods, which in the final text now has been reduced to at least 3 years. And also, we had concerns about the necessity and proportionality of this access by law enforcement authorities to potential access. They would have to make a request and meet a number of conditions. But anyway, we had concern about the necessity and proportionality of such access. So the plan is now to have this system ready by 2020. The EU agency in charge of large-scale IT system, EU LISA, is responsible for building the system, but also once it starts its operation, for managing the system. the question remains how exactly the collection and the matching of these 4 fingerprints and the facial image will take place at border crossing points. This is not clear from the entry-exit regulation. For travelers who have a visa, they won't need to have their fingerprints taken a second time. Their fingerprints are already available in the visa information system, so they will be retrieved from the visa information system. The second regulation of the Smart Borders package that was already mentioned by Franck is the modification of the Schengen Borders Code. And it provides some precisions in this regard. It includes provision on the use of automated border control systems, such as self-service system and e-gates, where the passenger would be able to proceed themselves to not all or some of the border checks. It provides definition for this technology, but it leaves it to member states to decide whether or not and to what extent they will use these technologies. For instance, they could use a combination of e-gates and self-service system, one of them or none of them. So it specifies that these technologies should always be used under the supervision of border guards in order to be able to detect any fraud. To be able to use them, a third country national would need a passport with a chip, whose authenticity will have to be checked, and also on which a facial image will have to be stored to allow identity verification. They should be designed in such a way that they can be used by all travelers except for children under 12, and also in a way that fully respects human dignity, in particular in cases involving vulnerable persons. So finally, another precision in the Schengen Borders Code is that a sufficient number of staff members should also be present to assist travelers with the use of this system, which might be very easy for some of us, but not for everyone. But all of these specification in the Schengen Borders Code leaves still a very large room for maneuver to member states. So including perhaps we'll see the possibility to collect these biometric data on the move, but also on the way they will implement data protection safeguards for the use of these technologies, for instance, which could have a very direct and concrete impact on travelers. So that's it for the Smart Border package, but I would like to say also a few words on interoperability. The EDPS doesn't have a position yet on the proposal that were tabled in December. We were involved in the work of the high-level expert group on information system that was launched by the Commission, and that was reflecting on the different possibilities to set up this interoperability between the existing and future large-scale IT systems. So we were involved in that forum, and we also issued a preliminary statement in annex to their final report and a reflection paper on interoperability. But on the final proposal, we don't have yet a public position. But in any event, what the Commission is proposing with this two proposal on interoperability is to stop the functioning of existing and future large-scale IT systems in silos, but to make them talk with each other. And to do so, they propose to build what they call a European search portal that would allow border guards to search this system at once, so simultaneously, and have combined results from all of them, instead of having to go and check Schengen, VIS, Eurodac, and one by one. So the results would be quicker, and they would have combined results. So, but also a shared biometric matching system that would allow search based on biometrics across several systems. So based on, for now, the facial image and fingerprints. And a common identity repository data with alphanumeric data of different systems. The EDPS will come up with will issue an opinion in the next months on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lara. And so this ends our sharing of views on this question. So now I will give the floor back to Diana, who share with me the roles of chair and moderator to initiate the question time.
Yeah, I also want to thank our panelists for their interventions and their insights about this interesting topic. First of all, do you want to respond to each other's interventions? Does anybody have a comment, or shall I open up with the Q&A session? I have some questions which I'm burning to ask you, so if you don't mind, I will shoot. I like that both Franck and Mikko mentioned the scenario of sea borders and land borders. Normally, very often, the discussion when it comes to border controls is very often on airports. Mikko mentioned very clearly that there are certain challenges, practical challenges, such as the weather conditions, which influence the performance and outcome of biometric checks, or also moving trains, and these were wonderful examples. What I'm wondering is the problem of accurate identification and verification of travelers. Is it the lack of enough data, meaning do we need more biometrics, or is it a challenge in itself, or do we have outstanding challenges remaining concerning the existing biometrics, such as facial images and fingerprints? And will the improvement, so the solution of these challenges be sufficient, or do we really need additional biometric identifiers? What do you think?
Okay. So if we are looking at the land border, and if you're talking there about improving speed, which is mainly the topic also from the research project point of view, there are some issues with if you want to have automated processing at land borders. There was a research project in the past. It's the FastPass project, also a EU Horizon. No, it was an FP7 program, and there were done some tech checks, basically with face recognition at the borders. And what could be found out there is, if you want to automate it there, you're getting into trouble with the environmental conditions, like blinding the cameras and stuff like that. So, of course, there can be a discussion if there are not biometric modalities that are more suitable to be used in such environmental conditions that are not as much affected by these environmental conditions. So from my point of view, yes, it makes sense to talk about that, yeah.
Yes, perhaps from my point of view, I mentioned the one aspect at the land borders, which is certainly also related to the sea border traffic, big harbors, for example, big ports, which is the car lanes, how the checks are performed there. Let's say that I would more emphasize the need to find a way to implement the current possibilities and let's say the possibilities which will come after the new legislation is in force, meaning that, for example, some kind of new tools, technological solutions enabling to enhance the efficiency of border checks on a car lanes using some intelligent glasses or whatever, taking into account the different light conditions and other aspects. One point I would still like to mention, what I didn't say in my previous intervention on the use of biometrics, that as we know, the quality of most of the travel documents is improving and has improved all the time. So one challenge is to find so-called impostors, meaning persons using somebody else's authentic documents. So that is also one aspect which emphasizes the need to use biometrics at the border crossings.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? I'm conscious of the time and that soon we will have the bell ring. Please state your name and affiliation. And
hello.
Hello.
I'm Tobias Morschus from Datenschutzraum Germany. And I like to ask a question on biometrics in the context of the more and more rising of high-resolution CCTV and more and more sensors rising in the world of IoT. So do we have to protect our biometric identification data in the public, and can we go out without being fully covered when we want to protect our biometric information so it is only used for authentication and not when I'm in a supermarket or somewhere else where I think high-resolution sensors can get very good information about me, and then every biometric can be faked in the future.
Should I answer? Okay. Well, I can understand the concern, and I think it's a valid concern. Yeah, of course. If you are talking about CCTV, especially, there is an issue that also facial images are by now available by almost everyone, especially if you have been on Facebook or so. So the abuse of such information is possible, yeah. But I think it's basically what we are discussing here, the GDPR and things like that, they are used basically to prevent that. You cannot prevent it technical-wise, yeah. How would you remove these images from the internet, yeah? If someone wants to abuse it, he can do that, yeah.
I think this is again about the purpose limitation principle. Yeah. That is a big basis of the GDPR. You know, there are big fines that are now linked to the fact of not respecting the GDPR, and that's also something that is a guarantee against the fact that the purpose limitation principle would not be respected.
Thank you. I see we have a second question, please.
Yes, my name is Jesper Lund. I'm from ITPOL Denmark, a digital rights organization. And my question is that 6 months ago, the Court of Justice delivered its opinion on the EU-Canada PNR agreement. And that opinion said, among other things, that Canada could not store on a general and undifferentiated basis PNR data for all travelers once they have left Canada. And secondly, that Canada could not process sensitive PNR items, such as meal preferences, in the PNR system in the first place. That is, collect those PNR items. So how can the European Union, given this judgment, implement a system which requires collection of biometrics stored in centralized databases and retain that data for, if I remember correctly, 3 years?
Well, first, in a PNR agreement, no biometric data are processed. That's the first thing. Secondly, okay, the conditions in that, and I really welcome the decision of the court. We're speaking about a transfer of personal data to a country that is considered as a third country. So you have to place the reasoning of the court in that context again. We are not in a situation where a public European authority is putting in place databases. But of course, there were discussions about proportionality and necessity, as it was recalled by the EDPS.
I think Lara also wants to intervene.
Yes, I remember this opinion from July that came up just, at the point where the agreement on entry-exit system was basically done. and several people indeed made the parallel with the between the PNR and the entry-exit system. To answer, can we apply this to the entry-exit system? I cannot answer, but I would be indeed very, very interested in if the court were to assess the proportionality and necessity of entry-exit system as it is now, if what would be the decision now, given its previous jurisprudence, including on data retention and Canada PNR.
Thank you. One last question, please.
Yes, okay, it's also Franck Herman, also from Datenschutzraum Germany. For me, you mixed a lot of reasons for border control and together, and it's very. I think it's very difficult to do that because it's a reason that certain databases are separated from each other. For example, or Eurodac, so it has a special reason. But now to the question, it's about the idea to have multi-biometrics on a mobile phone. I find this very strange, and I'd like to ask, US border control sometimes makes data dumps from foreigner telephones, from foreigner mobile phones. So maybe if they do a data dump from my phone with all the multi-biometrics on it, this is then handed over and used in the US. Is this covered by GDPR or European Charter of Fundamental Rights? That's the question.
So maybe first let me say that the idea that has been presented here is that the biometric and biographic data on the phone is encrypted. So even if you dump it, it's secured in a way. So that was the basic idea behind that. And the second basic idea was there was a discussion basically in the project, how to approach this challenge from the European Union. How can we do that? By at the same time looking at the GDPR and the principles that are behind there. And we said basically it's better to put it on the phone encrypted because then you can have an option in the app to delete it if you don't want to have it anymore. You have power over the data in that way. Then putting it into a database where you don't have power on it anymore. Yeah. So this was the approach or the background why we thought about that solution. Yeah.
Can I add something about this? Paradoxally, in that project, and I'm serious about data protection issues. The fact is that if we are doing what was in the call, collecting various modalities, which are not, first, they are not reproducible. They are not reproducible like fingerprints or face. For example, the way of walking, you cannot reproduce it. That's one thing. Secondly, those new modalities are not uniquely identifying someone. Imagine that you put them in different databases, in different templates protection. You lose one, well, it's not a problem because if you lose one, it's not a modality that would identify uniquely someone. It is the fusion and a combination of all of them that could potentially be a problem. But again, the whole of it would be encrypted, so we can avoid the problem. And paradoxically, I think it is an approach to better data protection.
Thank you. I want to thank the panelists and the audience again. This was the last eviction call, so we are supposed to free the stage for the next panel. But feel free to carry out the conversation and the discussion upstairs later during the breaks. Thank you.